This show was made possible by a grant from the Jewish Women's Foundation of New York.
In America, a television series that celebrates the contributions of Jewish women to U.S. society. I'm Blanche Wiesen Cook, and I am pleased to be surrounded by the 5 extraordinary women here to talk about a question that all Jewish women confront at some point in their lives: how to maintain a Jewish identity while being an integral and productive member of U.S. society. My guests are Alisa Solomon, a professor at the City University of New York and journalist who reports on issues affecting Israel and the Jewish community at home. Marilyn Neimark, also a professor at the City University and co-host of the WBAI weekly program Beyond the Pale, the Progressive Jewish Radio Hour. Elana Bekerman of the Jewish Community Relations Council in New York City. Miriam Eljas, publisher of The Blueprint, a non-denominational newspaper that reports on Jewish lifestyle and events in the New York metropolitan area. And Blu Greenberg, a widely published author on issues of feminism and Jewish life. Welcome to you all. I am so pleased that you are here, and I think what I would like to do actually is start with a question that precedes the question of how do we accommodate our Jewish reality in U.S. society to the question of what is a Jewish woman. Because when I was thinking of this, I was thinking about Emma Goldman and Rosa Luxemburg and Lillian Wald, who was criticized by Emma Goldman. She said, all you ever do is teach immigrant children to cut sponge cake with a fork to become Americanized. So what I'd like to do is go around, starting with you, Alisa Solomon. What is a Jewish woman?
Oh, I didn't know I would have to go first. Well, I think it's a question that one can only really answer for herself, not in the abstract or generally. And I think it's as complicated as asking what's a woman or what's any kind of person or woman. So I guess I'd have to say that it's someone for whom a sense of herself incorporates both a gender identity and an ethnic, religious, familial, tribal identity, and that those two things have meaning together in how she lives and expresses her life.
Thank you. What about you, Marilyn?
Well, you know, when you said you were going to ask this question, I thought, well, what would happen if she said, what's a French woman? What's an Italian woman? What's a Chinese woman? And you'd say, well, somebody who's French, Chinese, Italian. When you say, what is a Jewish woman, it comes with so much baggage and freight. I mean, you said Emma Goldman and Rosa Luxemburg. You could have said Molly Goldberg. You could have said a Jewish American princess. You could have said Hadassah. You could have said Eleanor Roosevelt, who, from my father's point of view, was a Jewish woman. And so that it's an oddity.
And you once said, you're not a Jewish woman.
Well, that's true.
What did you mean by that?
Because I'm certainly Jewish, and I'm certainly a woman, and I'm certainly very identified as a Jew and identified as a woman. But this combination, Jewish woman, has so much baggage, and so much of that baggage is not something I want to carry around for the rest of my life. I mean, Emma Goldman, Rosa Luxemburg, sure, happy to. But that's not generally what people think of when they say...
And for folks who don't know who they are, I mean, the leading anarchist revolutionary and the leading, you know, socialist revolutionary of the 19th century, and then Lillian Wald, who nobody knows who she is, but she's the woman who gave us public health nursing and public health, and wasn't Jewish at all from her point of view. She went to ethical, you know, culture society. And so these are universalist, secular, radical women.
So what I think I meant, Blanche, when I said that, is that for me, at least, and this is obviously very personal, but for me, Jewish woman carries with it a lot of baggage that I don't want any part of, which has to do with patriarchy and the role of religion and the way the two combine to oppress women and so on.
Thank you. And then Elana.
No, when I was thinking about this question, similar to both of you, I was actually thinking, when I was growing up, I had this vision of what the Jewish ideal woman would be. It's this Orthodox, straight woman who covers her hair, covers her elbows, you know, prays 3 times a day or however many she's supposed to. And I always felt in my heart that that was what I wanted to be. I wanted to be the ideal Jewish woman. And slowly, I realized I would never actually fit that model. That wasn't me. That wasn't who I am. I did a little soul searching, and I found that for me, the Jewish woman is continuously evolving, continuously changing. I think that for me, it's somebody who every single day they're looking for something different, looking to grow somehow, whether it is, you know, to be modest or whether it is to pray, but it's also a little bit more than that. You know, just to figure out who you are as a person, to figure out what Judaism means to you. I don't know. I mean, I think it's just it's an evolving process, and it's never a solid phrase or statement.
Great. Thank you. Now, I'm sorry, Miriam.
It's a very difficult question. I think it's also a very personal one, as has been addressed. I believe that there have been so many changes in the past 100 years, I think far more in the past century than ever before, that really influence what it means to be a Jewish woman today. And like I said, it's a personal question. And I myself have gone through my own changes and questions. And there are a lot of issues where I think it's a matter of finding a balance of your heritage, what's comfortable for you, and finding meaning in celebrating, you know, your Judaism, and yet moving forward and celebrating your life as a woman also. It's a question of balance, and you know, it's as you mentioned, it's an evolving process.
Thank you. Blu Greenberg.
I think it's such a wide range, and the fact is that women now have so many opportunities. Jewish women have so many opportunities to express themselves in a variety of ways that they never had before. But so a Jewish woman is Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and she's also the immigrant woman who just stepped off the boat. And she lives in many different places, unlike you know, a French woman lives in France, but a Jewish woman is identified as a Jewish woman all over the world. I think she does carry a lot of baggage. I have to say, personally, I love carrying that baggage. I feel it's a privilege to be born both as a Jew and as a woman in this generation. I think sometimes there are tensions between being a Jew and carrying the tradition forward and being a feminist, and one has to negotiate those tensions, negotiate the impasses. But by and large, I think it's a very creative process of identifying as both a Jew and woman.
That's a wonderful place to explore this further, because you, Blu Greenberg, are really the pioneering creator for a whole lot of people of something that, you know, when you say it, people say, well, that's an oxymoron. Orthodox, feminist vision. And you really gave us an orthodox feminist vision. So when Marilyn says, I don't want to carry this baggage around, and you say, well, I'm happy to have it, to carry it around, but you changed it. So let's pause there and deal with that.
Well, I do feel that it is a privilege, and I don't see everything that I don't see every product of patriarchy as negative. Patriarchy has a negative connotation in our society, but a great deal of what we come to affirm and believe, came out of a patriarchal religion, which then developed, and we're moving towards now equality rather than patriarchy. But I don't want to, throw the baby out with the bathwater.
But what is Orthodox feminism?
Orthodox feminism affirms halacha, the tradition, Jewish law, and it affirms the idea of women's equality. And since there are many areas that we have inherited in the tradition, areas of liturgy, women's leadership, women's opportunity even for learning, for study, rites of passage, we entered the last century, or the middle of the last century even, with a great imbalance between men and women in these areas. And so feminism, Orthodox feminism, is rewriting the balance and enabling women to enter the tradition more fully and find equality in relationships as well, and yet affirm and live a halachic life, a Jewish way of life.
Well, for younger people, because I know that your influence on younger people has been truly extraordinary. I mean, in a recent conversation with Letty Cottin Pogrebin, she talked about how her own father wouldn't count her as one of the required 10, one of the required minyan, to say Kaddish for her own mother. And, Cynthia Ozick once wrote something that said, in my synagogue, that's the only place where I'm not a Jew, where I'm not considered a Jew. God doesn't want to hear from me. Now you're working to change that, and my question for you is, how is that evolving? What does it mean to be a modern Orthodox Jewish woman?
It's really interesting. I did not grow up observant. I did go to Jewish day school, and I actually went to an Orthodox high school. And I took this on myself. I knew it was out there. I knew what I was getting into. And I was not fulfilled in my life spiritually, religiously, in any way. And I needed something else. I tried out, I guess, more to the right, what I was trying to describe before, a more, I hate these terms, Orthodox and conservative, I hate the terms, but a more traditional life. And I tried to fit a mold of somebody that I wasn't. I look at myself as this progressive woman who works, who goes to school, who values education, who values, being in relationships with non-Jews, with a diverse group of people. And I just didn't fit the mold to be a more traditional Jew. I kind of stumbled into modern Orthodoxy. I hadn't really heard about it when I was growing up. And I think it just found me, I guess. I didn't know what it meant, and then I started getting more involved in synagogues and meeting more people, especially at where I work at the Jewish Community Relations Council. I found these people who were like me, and I still need to grow. I still need to learn about what exactly modern Orthodoxy entails, but it just allows me to lead the lifestyle I lead anyway, but now including all the spiritual elements, including all of the observant. I can be an observant woman who, it just feels right. It just feels who I am.
Alisa, let's have a free-for-all here.
Is that all right?
Yeah, jump in.
Because I'm struck, I'm moved by what Elena's describing, and I'm also struck by how much this is the history of Judaism for thousands of years. It's always evolved. It's always, there's no pope, right? There's nobody who says this is the one and only way that it's lived and done.
There are some who say that, but
yes, there are.
They're not telling the whole truth.
Right. Certainly there are significant texts and also customs, and of course laws. but these have been there's been interpretive tension around all of these for as long as Judaism has been on the planet. And so when I think about, now that we've warmed up a little, slightly better response to the first question, when I think about Jewish women, I think a lot about my own family, where the women were very prominent and equal in an observant family. I think of my grandmother, who taught Hebrew and Torah study alongside my grandfather in the Midwest. And I'm not sure, I don't know much about their marriage. It probably wasn't egalitarian by today's standards. But nonetheless, there was something in that life that I think we would recognize now as feminist, even if it wasn't so named. And my mother and my aunt, Alisa Solomon, who carved out space in their own ways to further that tradition and to assert themselves in it and to pass it on to us in a lively, loved, and way for us to make it our own. And I think this is part and parcel of the tradition itself. It's not something that the tradition is open. It's open to these things, and I think that's why we've been able to remake it.
Right. I want to give everyone else a chance, so I'll be very brief here. I think those are two such significant points, and that Alisa's just made, and that we wouldn't be alive for 4,000 years if it hadn't been as a dynamic system, not impermeable. The other thing is, the other point is really what you're talking about is a definition of equality, and I think it's so significant to make that, because some people interpret equality as identicality, identical roles, and what you're saying is that there was a cognitive equality, not in every relationship, but in many of the relationships where the roles were differentiated and people had different tasks. So not every single thing that went before us, and not all the baggage that we carry is negative. There were different definitions of women and men in relationships.
Yeah. I was just thinking, as you were discussing these important issues, that one of the beauties of Judaism for me that I found in my own journeys is that the Torah and the blueprint for life it's not in the hands of heaven. That's a famous saying. I forget exactly where it's from, but the Torah is here. Judaism is here on this earth. It's not some boxed in lifestyle that we can't really relate to. And this system of rabbinic authority and leadership in the Jewish community evolves. And I think hand in hand with that goes women's roles. And in this particular century, I believe that has come to the forefront as one of the main issues facing rabbinic leadership today. And I'm not even going to go into the whole rabbi issue, but particularly in Orthodoxy. But I think that I have personally experienced, going to Jewish schools and some of the institutions here on the East Coast, that women's roles have advanced, but within the framework of halacha, of Jewish law, and that may not have happened 100 years ago, and it's allowed because Judaism moves forward. And if it weren't for that, we wouldn't be, Judaism wouldn't be around today. We take what happens in modern life and we enable it to work within the framework of Judaism. But it's not like someone's just sitting there saying, oh, this doesn't work, okay, and that's modern Judaism. It's thought out and it's part of the system.
And we disagree. And we can all disagree.
I think I remember Blu saying once, I did go to the very first Orthodox Feminist Conference because of my program on WBAI, and Blu was on a subsequent show and other people who were involved in organizing it. And I have to say that it was actually a thrilling experience. If there was anything that was going to turn me back to religion, or to religion, I shouldn't even say back, it might have been that, because just the intellectual and emotional energy at that conference was extraordinary, truly extraordinary. And I think that Orthodox Jewry has no idea what a roller coaster it's on, because it's changing and it's going to keep changing. But it's not the tradition that I identify with. And the tradition that I identify with is a political tradition. It's the Labor Bund. It's the belief in being a full and active participant in the society you live in and changing it for the better. Now that's not, of course, inconsistent with Judaism. I mean, Tikkun Olam is about repairing the world, and that's certainly what I'm talking about. But it is it's a different tradition, and so I recall you saying at that conference, I think it was, that where there's a rabbinic will, there's a halachic way. If you really want to change something, you figure out how to change it within the rules. And I guess, well, because I respect and admire you in particular so much, okay, but you have to really accept that frame of rules is in fact the domain within which you're operating. Mm-hmm. And for me, it doesn't have any meaning. It really doesn't. For me, the frame of rules is the entirety of human history and philosophy. It's not limited to that. Well, we end up, in terms of how we think one ought to live a decent life, probably in the same place. Maybe not specifically about the roles of women or and so on, but in terms of what makes a decent life, I suspect we're in the same place.
And I think the fact is that you remind us that we shouldn't define Judaism only in terms of ritual and tradition, but also the tremendously powerful and ethical tradition that's also Judaism. And in a certain sense, you've plucked that out of, and that's the focus of your life.
Right, right, yeah.
That's also.
I remember taking a course with Shlomo Noble at the Jewish Theological Seminary once, and maybe it was Hertzberg who said, and he was talking about law and love. And law is what keeps us together, that's kind of the glue. But love is what drives us forward. And it's really, it's the ethics. And, as one looks at just history, and as an historian, some of us do look at history primarily, I mean, that is the tradition in a world where Jews in the great diaspora were becoming more and more secular, but they were becoming more and more universalist and more radical and more communitarian, and Labor Bund and other kinds of socialist and so on, not to mention anarchists. So I have a very specific question. I grew up in the Bronx, and my family attended a little Orthodox synagogue where I sat with my daddy right next to the bima, because my daddy and his pals snuck me in. But all the women sat high up in a balcony behind a curtain.
Till what age did you sit with your daddy?
We moved from the Bronx when I was 9.
You would have been exiled to the women's balcony.
Well, then I wouldn't
in another
have gone
year
anymore.
or two.
But I remember that very, vividly. Like this seemed to me just really wrong, because down here was where the action was. And that sense of where does a woman count, and is God hearing those hidden women behind a curtain? Does this still exist? I mean,
yeah, it's a feature of Orthodoxy. It's a definition of Orthodoxy.
And is that okay with modern Orthodox?
Yeah,
feminists?
it is okay. It's very interesting that it is the issue of mechitza, the separation of men and women, is hardly on the Orthodox feminist agenda, except to the extent that women cannot see and hear and feel included. And there are many places where women are, their vision and their hearing are impaired in that setting. But I think synagogue architecture has also responded to the feminist movement. So there are many synagogues. My sister-in-law, who doesn't call herself a feminist, she lives in Israel, just told me a few months ago that they're building a synagogue in her neighborhood, which is I would say probably, I hate to use these definitions either, but if I'd have to, I'd say somewhere between right and right-wing Orthodoxy. In fact, probably right-wing modern Orthodoxy is how she would define herself. And so the women, they were rebuilding the synagogue, and they were building a balcony they were just rebuilding the same old balcony. And the women who are the women who cover their hair and who don't, as I said, identify as feminist, but in fact who live lives that have changed over the last 25 years, they organized a protest, and they had to then redo all the architectural plans and create a balcony that women had better sight lines and had a sense of being not at the periphery. They're not behind the curtain. They have good vision. They can see everything. And anyhow, I visited them for Shabbat, and I was sitting in the synagogue, and the synagogues that I go to primarily don't have balconies. They have men and women at the same level, side by side. But anyhow, it was sitting up in a balcony, which is something I haven't done since my childhood practically, and looking over and watching it, thinking to myself, if I had to choose one place or the other, I'd rather be sitting up here looking down than sitting in the fishbowl down there. But at any rate, you know, for some people, it is it falls into the category of trade-off, and we make trade-offs. And for some people, it falls into the category of this is perfectly comfortable, and I can have an equal spiritual experience here on my side of the divider.
I agree. I mean, if you come to the idea of a mechitza, I can completely understand how people coming. I grew up this way, but from an outsider's perspective, I could see how someone could find it offensive. But I think when you come to Judaism from a fighting standpoint, I'm not saying it's okay for everyone, because I could see people being upset. But if you want to fight every point, you're not even ready to hear it. You know, I think it's a matter of mindset and perspective and knowing where Judaism has come from. We've come a long way, and if you think it's just going to end here, we're on a roller coaster. That's for sure, as you said earlier. But it's all about the mindset.
I think that's a good.
Alisa.
I think that's a good point. And at the same time, I think that it has to do with that idea that Marilyn raised before about whether one places herself in a particular domain to begin with. That I know what you mean about that fighting feeling. I mean, there's certain synagogues I can't even go in because
it puts you on edge.
Yeah, my back gets up almost instantaneously, and often it's not the architecture. A lot of I've found increasingly over the years that it's the liturgy, it's the language, it's the hierarchical, masculine God language, for example. And it's not about going in with looking for a fight.
Right.
It's about really trying to enter the poetic call of that language and feeling completely shut out of it and not being able to using the imagery being providing a block and not being good poetry anymore, really.
And not just in Orthodox synagogues.
No, not in the slightest.
In conservative synagogues, and probably even Reform ones.
Absolutely.
I recall you and I used to belong to B'nai Jeshurun here in the city, and we tried very hard to get them to take another look at liturgy, and we even persuaded them to invite Marcia Falcon, who's a wonderful translator and poet and has written liturgy for Shabbat and is working on, I think, liturgy for the High Holy Days. And her work is just fantastic. And the resistance was incredible. That there's, but
was this when Marshall Meyer?
No, it was after Marshall died. But even someone like Letty Cottin Pogrebin said, but these are the words I know from my childhood. Right. These are the melodies I know from my childhood. And a real reluctance to kind of give that up.
The power of conditioning. Right.
Yes. On that note, with our notes from our childhood, we're going to take a break, and we'll be back in a few minutes. Thank you so much.
The best way out is by coming in. Going to family learning programs helps you and your family lead better lives. Call 1-877-FAMLET-1.
world through math and science, you'll never see anything the same way again. Go to girlsgotech.org.
You'll see.
Welcome back to Jewish Women in America. I'm Blanche Wiesen Cook, here with 5 fabulous women. We interrupted you, Marilyn, to take a break, and you were making a point about things that you grow up with, that you have in your childhood that are, you know, folks don't want to give it up. Could you continue with that?
Well, I think that we were talking about obstacles that stand in the way of change, and we were specifically addressing Alisa's point about the liturgy, that how the liturgy is so off-putting, partly because if you're an atheist like me, the God stuff doesn't exactly reverberate, but also because the language is so much about the men. And it doesn't satisfy me very much to substitute the female pronoun here and there, or to add the matriarchs to the list of patriarchs. It seems a bit of an awkward patch. And yet people, feminists, who in every other area of their lives are open to change, when it comes to something, I think, like religion, which is for so many people, such a deeply sedimented, integral part of themselves, that to give up something of it, to change something of it, is hard to do.
Mm-hmm. It is. It's the power of conditioning, number one, and so many of the issues and decisions and areas that are being looked at, the emotional freight and the psychological aspects of it are much more powerful, a determinant in one's feelings. And so, as you said before, halacha can be interpreted in a variety of directions, in a variety of ways on certain issues, and the interpreter does so based on all of these other non-halachic personal factors.
You were saying earlier about the difficulty of not writing on the Sabbath when you had to give a talk, and I was sitting here thinking, I'm sure at some point in my life it never occurred to me that I could spend one whole day not writing. And maybe that was just the end. I had to write something every day. And I think I must have been maybe 10 at that point. But why? Why can't you write? If you're going to give a talk, isn't that work? I mean, you're not supposed to work.
It comes back to Marilyn's point again, which is that either you're born into the system or you buy into the system, but you accept the system and its definitions and its parameters. And for one of the definitions for an Orthodox Jew of what you can and can't do on the Shabbat are the 39 different aspects of work, and writing is one of them. So I had writer's block for a long time. The only time I got unblocked was on Friday night when I felt the urge to, take a pen to my magnum opus. Of course, you don't have to be a psychologist to interpret all of that. But that's it. It's part of what I don't answer the telephone on Shabbat, and there's something that I love about it. There's nothing that and I'm there as a free person. I'm a free agent. So even though this is the tradition, and I've been taught that this is the way, I am perfectly aware that millions of other Jews have made other choices, and they're not thunderstruck, and the hole doesn't open and swallow them up. So I'm not there because of imminent punishment, but I do believe this is the commandment. These are the commandments. The commanding voice somehow operates through these laws, and so for me, Shabbat observed in an Orthodox manner is one of the greatest gifts that I think a person could have, a Jew could have, and it's changed my family's life, changed my life, defined my family's life in many ways. And so I might want to be at this wonderful auction that only takes place on a Saturday morning, but I think I get something in return that's much more powerful and beneficial to my soul, then.
Let's talk about things that have changed. I mean, you know, there are 6 of us around this table, and 5 of us are wearing slacks or pants or jeans or whatever we're wearing. When I taught at Stern, after I got momentarily married, a group of students came to my office and said, "We need to tell you, you're insulting us." And I said, "Oh, it's not my intention to insult you. How am I insulting you?" And they said, I was wearing a sleeveless dress. And I called up my mother, and we went to Altman's, which then existed but is now the Graduate Center.
Right.
And we bought, you know, those really long sleeve, long shirtwaist dresses, which I then wore. But now at Stern, you can wear slacks, which in those days, in the 1960s, young women didn't wear. And there were students who were married and faculty who were married who shaved their heads and wore, you know, those big bouffant wigs and head coverings. Because of so many Muslim women and what's happened in France, head coverings become, you know, really a dramatic issue. And those things have changed. So, and then I don't know about birth control. Orthodox women didn't participate in birth control for a very long time, or maybe just some Orthodox women.
They did, but they didn't tell, right?
Oh, okay.
Going back though, when I was at Stern, women did not wear pants for Judaic studies in the school building. Anything else goes, you know, outside, but in the school building, it was not the administration deemed it inappropriate to wear pants for certain classes. So it wasn't like everything's changed completely, but I can understand your experience, you know, when you were teaching as a professor.
Okay, so but my question is just a little bigger, which is that, you know, what we are allowed to wear in the world as the world turns has changed, especially things around, you know, not shaving and shaving heads and so on. And so maybe this is just kind of another part of that question. You know, how do we negotiate these changes?
As a Jewish woman, for anyone walking down the street, you see someone how they're dressed, and you cannot help but somehow judge that a little bit. You can't help it. You see someone wearing a certain, you know, a fancy suit. Oh, they must maybe be a business person or whatever it is. It influences how you see someone. And I think for a long time, it has been, you know, you associate a long skirt. And if you're walking around the Stern College area, near our studio here, you will see lots of young women wearing long skirts, and you know they're going to Stern. You see them in groups, you know. But I think for a long time you kind of identified the dress with the person, and it's hard to separate the two. It's just hard.
Well, now it's easier.
When I was growing up, no, when I got married, my sisters also got married. I look at the wedding pictures. This is in the Orthodox community, what would be called, you know, modern centrist orthodoxy. Everyone was wearing sleeveless dresses, including the rabbi's wife. Including the rabbi's wife. We didn't think about it, and then somehow, it did change. Then there was a period where no one wore pants, and now everybody, I mean, many Orthodox women are wearing pants, and you can see women wearing pants and covering their hair. It's like a crazy quilt, so to speak. A lot of personal packaging. I remember sitting on a beach, and you can find this on almost any beach in the summer, is, you know, with women who are wearing bathing suits and with hair covering. So someone else might look at that and think, you know, that is weird or very idiosyncratic, but people put it together in their own minds, in their own ways, and everything goes, or a lot goes, I should say, not everything. You don't see Orthodox women, you know, walking around the streets of Manhattan with their midriff bare and their belly button pierced or whatever it is.
And all the piercings, everywhere.
Right.
Well, as long as they're hidden, it's okay.
As long as they're hidden.
Yeah, as long as you're not flaunting. You know, I had such a problem. Was I going to wear a skirt today? Was I going to wear pants today? I just started wearing pants again from 3 years ago. And the reason I started wearing is I live on the Upper West Side. People look at you first, you know, for dating purposes or whatever the purposes are. And are you wearing a skirt? Are you going to cover your hair? You know, these are the most important questions. These questions define you, define who I am. If I'm going to cover my hair when I'm married, or if I only wear skirts. And I looked at those two questions and I said, my gosh, they're not me. It's not if I put on a skirt, if I put on pants, you know, as long as I'm modest in some respect, what I understand modesty, it's me. And that's the reason I stopped wearing skirts. I started in college to help identify. I was becoming more observant. I wanted to take on some new, you know, some new rituals to help me identify with becoming more observant. And when I came to New York, everyone is the same, and everyone was asking these questions about me, and I just needed to, within a modest framework, figure out how I was going to be me. And I guess
now, Elena, you grew up in Atlanta.
Yes, I did.
Did you have an Orthodox community in Atlanta?
No, I did not grow up Orthodox.
So this is something recent.
Yes, very recent. I grew up wearing everything.
What?
I grew up wearing anything and everything.
Okay.
But I went to the University of Maryland, and I was becoming slowly more, figuring out where I fitted in this whole Jewish spectrum. And I wanted to identify a little more with the more traditional group of people. And, you know, my friends were wearing skirts, and I liked the thought when it's not a Jewish college by any means, and I liked the idea that maybe somebody observant would walk by and realize, oh, you know, we're both the same, we're both wearing skirts. Or for my, you know, non-Jewish friends, they kind of understood this whole modesty thing a little more if I was wearing a skirt or if I was a little more modest. And then I got to a place where I am the same as everyone else. You know, we think similarly, we share common values and ideas, and I don't like being like everyone else. And
one of the things that we all share, even though I think three of us are arguably secular, would you consider yourself secular? I don't want to.
Go ahead.
And three of us are Orthodox, is a passion for responsibility, community, justice, which arguably is the love part of this equation that we inherit with our Jewish culture. And I'd like to have a conversation about how we see the importance of that part of our heritage.
I want to say one thing before we leap into that, if I may, because it relates a little to the question you just tossed my way, and that is that I think there's a vast space between secular and Orthodox. And it's defined in myriad ways. I mean, there are other denominations in Jewish practice, of course, but I think even for people who might more or less be kind of secular, there are things about the spirit of these various traditions and halachic imperatives that help define a life. So that, yeah, if I had to choose a label, probably I would say secular, and certainly I turn on the lights and write on Shabbos and so on. Yet I know when it's Shabbos, and I care about it, and I try to make the day be different. I actually try not to work on that day. But what I mean by that isn't the same thing that Blu means by that exactly. And I think there are a lot of ways that these these practices are given a kind of reality in individual lives.
I'd like to piggyback on that too, because I think that I used to use the term also Orthodox and secular, or religious and secular. I mean, I didn't use the term religious and secular, but I would say now that I think the term is observant and secular, because there is this whole range of religious expression, sentiment, identification, feeling. And I was thinking, Marilyn, you defined yourself as an atheist, but then even an atheist, even though according to Maimonides you wouldn't fall into the category if you deny the existence of Jews, but on the other hand, Judaism has been filled with atheists. You still identify as a Jew, and nobody would ever think of reading you out, you know, of the Jewish tradition.
Well,
so maybe some would, right? We have a very good friend, Michael Steinhardt, who's my husband works with the Michael Steinhardt Foundation, and he calls himself an atheist, which drives his close friends and even his family a little bit crazy. He's as much of an atheist as I'm an atheist, so to speak. He doesn't observe a lot of the law, but he is one of the most deeply religious persons in both his actions and his feelings. So I think observance is one thing, and religious secular is another whole thing. So
I think, in my experience, I run this newspaper called The Blueprint, and it's an event guide for the young Jewish community. And what I found, as I've been dealing with a number of different organizations, I had to deal with the issue of what is the word that we're going to print? Is it going to be religious? Is it Orthodox? Well, that's not really accurate. So we actually use the word unaffiliated or affiliated. Because if you have a connection to Judaism and you're celebrating your Judaism and you're, in your own way, that means you're affiliated. And who am I to judge what you're doing and how you're doing it? It's not my place. And especially as the newspaper, we provide information for how to get involved. But I think we actually had a number of individuals request us to label every event by denomination. And I thought about it, and it happened recently, about a month ago. And I was like, I can't do that. Part of one of the reasons that I started the paper was to be a platform for community, so everybody could do what they wanted to do in their own way and choose it. And to suddenly say this is Orthodox and go there and you'll know what you're getting into. You decided not to do it. Go out and find out for yourself. So
that's great. Good for you.
Thank you. So I sidetracked us a little from your question about the...
My question about justice. And since we're running out of time, maybe that question about justice could be either separate or connected to questions about hope for peace. I mean, we have peace and justice and responsibility. These are the great spiritual words. And then we have commitment and community. So thinking about the dynamics of those words in these really hard times, what do these words mean right now for you? Anybody want to start and jump in? Good.
Sure.
Thank you, Elena.
In the work I do, I work with all different types of diverse communities, and we deal with quality of life issues. We try not to discuss politics. We try not to discuss, topics that we might think might be a little controversial. And I think it's the same in in this room. I think that if we're looking to do justice in our communities, in our world, if we're looking to just help people around us, I don't think we need to bring our religious observance or lack of or unaffiliated, whatever these terms are, I don't think it's necessary to bring to the table. I think we need to find, a common goal or a common community we need to help, or just to be able to go out there and to have one voice. And I don't think it's even necessary to bring up all of our personal beliefs.
All the things that divide us.
We can find one issue, whatever the issue might be, to work together. And obviously we're sitting around here and we're fine and we're discussing, and I think that we can use this discussion to actually do and to actually get things done. And we will all have our own opinions always, and everyone's going to have different opinions, but as long as we're able to do and to produce and work together.
Could you just tell us what you do, because what you do is really very important.
Okay, I work for a Jewish agency,
which is
the Jewish Community Relations Council, and I work for a division of it called the New York Center for Community and Coalition Building. It is what it says. I'm a community organizer who goes out into different communities, whether it's Arab American, Chinese, anything, and we help their leadership develop skills to better interact with themselves, with the government, with NYPD, all ranges of different types of people. And we don't bring up politics, and we don't bring up issues that are problematic, but we help these communities solve problems and get things done. And I've met such amazing people in the process, and we don't agree on our religious ideals or anything, but we don't talk about that. And we might have personal conversations about it, but not on a roundtable conversation.
Elana, what do you mean by politics? Because what you're describing to me sounds like deeply political work.
I'm talking about if I'm working with a Muslim colleague. I'm not going to sit and discuss what is going on right now in Israel, Palestine. I'm not going to discuss that because we're not going to agree. We might have, we may have a private conversation and just have a conversation about it, but we're not going to discuss it when we're trying to help provide healthcare access to our to their clients or our clients. We're not going to talk
Let
about
me
that.
raise a question, if I can step into your
Please.
shoes, which
Please.
is, as American Jews, do we have an additional responsibility, a special responsibility, to influence the course of our government vis-a-vis the Middle East, specifically Israel and Palestine?
Well, since you...
Blu.
Yeah, I think we do. I think the facts have to be decided. The peace has to be negotiated there. But certainly, we have to influence. We have the right and the obligation to influence, and we have, because it grows out of our right and our obligation to seek peace and work for justice, and those are the burning issues. And we will choose to do this in a variety of ways. There's a lot of disagreement as to what constitutes, where should the pressure be on the government. And one thing about Jews is that they always disagree, and there are, many different viewpoints. And I think that's healthy because we'll come to the right place, hearing all the different voices. I'm glad that you're closing our discussion on this note, because sometimes I think about the fact that, I look at my life the last 30 years or so and say I worked on many of these issues on vis-a-vis the tradition, and I sometimes think I'm working inside of a small box, and even though these are very important to me and to my life as an Orthodox Jew, that in a way, all the real issues are, the tradition is meant not as an end in itself, but as a way of bringing repair of the world, tikkun olam, and sometimes we lose sight of that. So we have to continually be reminded that the tradition is about creating a better human being who will work for ethics and peace and justice in the world.
Thank you. Alisa, you've just edited a book called Wrestling with Zion. I know that because I'm very happy to have an article in that book, and Marilyn does as well. Would you, I suppose your book is an answer to Marilyn's.
Yes, in part it is, and it also, I think, dovetails with what Blu just said, that I, agree with entirely. I think we do have a responsibility, and even if we might, think the pressure points are different, or think that the, what will constitute justice, maybe we see differently, that the idea of the responsibility that comes out of our tradition and out of our connection to that troubled place, I think gives us an imperative to do something. I feel the imperative in other ways too. I feel it when Ariel Sharon says that, he's doing something in defense of or in the name of the Jewish people, that whether I want to be or not, I'm implicated in that. And so if I don't agree with it, I have to say no, thank you. And also as an American, since we're paying for it out of our tax dollars, I feel like I have a responsibility, just as I do with anything that the government that represents me does around the world. I feel responsible to say something about. So the book, Wrestling with Zion, Progressive Jewish American Responses to the Israeli-Palestinian Conflict, is a collection co-edited by the playwright Tony Kushner and me, that brings together about 50 writers, academics, historians, poets, activists, and so on, talking about how they understand that imperative, and some in analytical ways, some in personal ways, and so on.
Since you asked the question, Marilyn, do you want to?
Well, Israel has posed a real dilemma for American Jews, in part because for so many American Jews, Israel has become the way they are Jewish, and it's become their connection to the Jewish people. And it poses a dilemma because, at least in my view, it's an unjust state. It's an unjust state in terms of how it treats its own people, the Jewish people within Israel, class divisions, economic distress, and
Can
so
we
on.
start our interview all over again? Can we have another hour? I don't think that Israel poses a problem for most American Jews, and I think certainly Israel has made some mistakes, maybe many mistakes, but I look on balance, it's fighting for its life every day of the last 50 years. And I would have to say, I'd have to argue with you and say that I think it's been exercised the most incredible restraint in a situation of great vulnerability and provocation. So I think that we could probably start
We could start the whole thing over again.
right?
I know that you and I don't see it the same way.
I think that I'm going to plunge right in here and quote David Ben-Gurion, who said that one place to look for peace is for Israel to get out of the settlements. He said that in 1967. And he said, if we don't do that, we're going to lose our soul. So that we need to think really, really big about a lot of hope. And I really want to thank you all for coming, and I cannot believe we're out of time. Once again, Alisa Solomon, Marilyn, Neimark, Blu Greenberg, Elana Bekerman, Miriam Eljas, thank you so much for being here today for Jewish Women in America. I'm Blanche Wiesen Cook, and maybe we can have another hour on Israel-Palestine.
Great.
We can lobby for that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Blanche.
And